In this module, we'll discuss the types of UX research related content that recruiters look for in applicant resumes and how to translate your impressive academic experience into a more condensed, private sector oriented format. We'll also go over some important guidelines and specific examples for paring down lengthy CVs into a one-page resume. At the end of this module, you'll be able to convert your CV into a resume that's clearly legible to the private sector, piques recruiters' interests, and ultimately gets your application flagged for follow-up.
One of the hard truths about transitioning from academia to UX is that a lot of the content of a typical academic CV doesn't really speak to the requirements found in UX research job descriptions. And similarly, the way experience is presented in a CV most often won't match what recruiters and hiring managers are looking for in a candidate. Additionally, job recruiters and hiring managers are typically very busy and manage significant workloads. They may spend only a few moments scanning your resume before deciding whether or not they want to move forward with you as a job candidate or pass. What this means for you is that it's absolutely imperative that you streamline the heck out of your CV, omitting a lot of hard-earned achievements such as edited volumes, journal articles, or even conference presentations, reframing many of your skills and experiences into a more condensed and industry-appropriate one-page resume.
So let's talk about the essentials for a UX research resume. We'll cover the importance of demonstrating ownership, collaboration, and most importantly, impact, and how academic experience and skills can be translated into one or more of these resume assets. When reviewing an applicant's resume, the hiring manager and recruiter will be looking for the UX researcher's ability to lead or manage research projects from end to end. That is, from identification of the research problem or problems, scoping the problem space, identifying the types of research methods to use, execution, project management, analysis, and delivery of findings.
Owning a research project doesn't mean you did it alone and made all of the decisions. A critical component of a UXR job resume is to demonstrate that you have and can pull on the strengths of others and subject matter experts. Ownership is a lot like a principal investigator role, where you have oversight across an entire project, but nonetheless delegate roles and responsibilities to others that might have the subject matter expertise or interests in those areas. Much like a principal investigator in academic institutions, a UX researcher in the private sector are regarded as experts in identifying research needs, discerning the appropriate study designs, executing complex research, and distilling that data into meaningful insights and results to be used by the company and the product teams therein. Now, let's go through some examples of how you can take your academic experience or work experience and transform it into an attestation of your ownership and leadership. What you don't want to do is give a flat, fact-based, neutral description of what it is that you did in graduate school or in your professorship. So, for example, designed, executed, and analyzed a year-long qualitative study in rural Guatemala, or ethnographic study of Japan's health promotion and prevention program for elderly for cross-cultural comparison with the US. In these examples, there's no memorable or contextualizing details that transforms the perfunctory list of actions into a rich storytelling device. Instead, what you want to do is really drive home the point that you owned this research project at every stage, from start to finish. By adding just a few words, you can really transform that statement to communicate the problem you identified, the approach that you took, and why it made sense to take that approach, and finally, what impact or results your work had. If we rewrite the previous examples of what not to do with a few more narrative elements, we can convey a lot more about the researcher's role and what its impact was. So, for example, owned a year-long research project in rural Guatemala from initial project design and execution to data analysis, through to publication of findings and submission to Guatemala's Ministerio de Desarrollo Social. Scoped and executed an in-depth ethnographic study of Japan's prevention healthcare program for the aging society crisis, outlining and promulgating cultural adaptations for a similar program in the U.S.
Another thing that your resume should reflect is your experience with collaboration and management. This is important because UX research is often carried out at complex companies that rely heavily on the effective and efficient collaboration and communication among various functional groups like engineering, product management, design, and the like. As an academic, you can speak to collaborating with colleagues, other disciplines, or organizations and specialist groups outside of academia. In addition to project ownership and collaboration with others, you'll also want to speak to stakeholder management. In this context, what we mean by stakeholders are those critical individuals or groups who are directly involved in shaping the outcome of a given project or product. So your resume needs to clearly demonstrate that you have experience managing stakeholders, showing that you're capable of working with those key players and deftly navigating their conflicting priorities and interests, and really being that person who has successfully brought everyone together to accomplish a goal. These 2 bullet points are great examples of the kinds of descriptions you want to have in your resume that really show your cross-functional and stakeholder management chops. This first example collaborated with academics, civil society leaders, and politicians affiliated with the Instituto de Estudios Peruanos to produce a policy brief on anti-corruption legislation in Peru. And the second example moderated workshops with local students, community members, and police officers to develop community-based strategies to heighten security and minimize violence within South Chicago neighborhoods. What's great about these descriptions is that they include active verbs, they mention the stakeholders involved, the activities you led them through, and the outcome achieved.
Let's move on now to the last resume essential, impact. One glaring difference between academic CVs and industry resumes is that academic CVs generally focus on accomplishments, while UX research resume and the private sector resume more broadly focus on impact. Being an academic or former academic, you'll be familiar with accomplishments of the following sort: publications, edited volumes, scholarship or fellowship, speaker requests, conferences, honors, awards, citations, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, these accomplishments mean very little in the private sector. Impact, which we'll go into more detail in the following slides, is arguably the most heavily weighted and valued metric for an employee in the private sector. And it's also the area that UXRs hailing from academia struggle with the most. The focus of impact in the private sector is around meaningful change of the sort that can be evidenced, be it through measurements and metrics, in perceptions and understandings, or in process and practice. To make it meaningful, there is a clear before state and after state, and your work is the catalyst for that state change. The larger the degree or scale of change, the more meaningful it becomes. At this point, you might be thinking, well, I don't have any meaningful impact of that sort with my academic work. And honestly, you don't, at least not yet, because it's about changing your frame of mind as to what aspects of your accomplishments you emphasize in your resume to make them read as impact. Let's go through 2 examples of how to talk about academic work and experience in a way that transforms accomplishments into impact in a more legible way for the private sector. For our first example, served as an academic advisor to 3 undergraduate students, all of whom gained admission to their top graduate school programs of choice. Here, let's say you're speaking to your time as an adjunct professor. How this statement has been crafted highlights a before state, the undergraduate education of advisees, and an after state, their admission to their graduate school of choice. The bridge that you've built in this statement between these 2 states is your role as academic advisor. You, acting as the advisor, is the catalyst of change. This simple sentence structure effectively transforms what otherwise might read as an expected job role into an impact statement with you as the agent of change. All right, let's look now at our second example. Submitted translated dissertation to the Renewable Energy Department of Peru's Ministerio de Energía y Minas to inform the development of future rural electrification policies in the country. Here you're talking about your work that served as your doctoral dissertation, but you also took care to translate and share this thesis with Peru's Ministry of Energy so that it could be read by them and affected change. The scale at which this organization can affect change confers a healthy degree of meaningfulness and speaks to the impact of your work. Although the impact is more hopeful and still somewhat vague, it provides enough detail for a recruiter or hiring manager reviewing your resume to infer the scale and potential impact of your work. There are a number of commonly used tropes for framing impact in the private sector. Consider borrowing from these in your own resume to help you get started in translating academic accomplishments and experiences into a UXR resume. They read as follows: identified previously unknown or unarticulated condition or situation, informed important decision-making processes, resulted in recommendations to an organization, potential for future impact, participated in thought leadership or broader disciplinary conversations on a topic.
Here we'll discuss detailed approaches for turning your lengthy CV into a one-page resume, going section by section and providing guidelines of what kinds of things you'll want to do and things you'll want to avoid. Note that in the private sector, you'll be uploading your resume digitally to job applications and can therefore take advantage of hyperlinks to other resources and evidence as needed. Double check your docs and PDFs to ensure your hyperlinks are all functional, and if need be, you can also list out the web addresses. At the top of your resume, you'll want to start off by putting your name and academic title. Below that, put your full phone number along with a country code, which can be important if you're applying to international or remote jobs. And although it might seem counterintuitive given how much you've accomplished in academia, don't use your .edu email address, as this will make you look like a student and just undermine the professional persona that you're trying to project. And you can go ahead and omit any physical or mailing address because this just takes up space and you won't communicate via snail mail with any potential employer. In the header of your resume, you can also provide a hyperlink or web address to your personal site or portfolio if you have one. Providing a hyperlink to your LinkedIn profile and your resume is common practice these days. Further along, we'll talk more about the utility of LinkedIn for job hunting and working with recruiters, but for now, assume you'll need to set up a LinkedIn account if you haven't already. One important thing to note is that CVs generally don't feature summary statements, while resumes often do. So here you want to compose a brief but punchy statement that quickly captures what you're an expert in, how long you've been doing it for, and what you bring to the role. If possible, try and incorporate some of the keywords and phrases from the job description that you're applying to, but we'll hit on this later in this module. On your resume, you're going to be pressed for space, so only list the highest degree that you've earned, leaving off degrees such as your master's if you have a PhD, and leave off your undergraduate degree if you have an MA. Additionally, you might be tempted to list your dissertation title and maybe even the name of your committee chair, but don't worry, you'll be drawing from your academic work for the job experience section of your resume. An additional note of caution is that familiarity with degree acronyms like PhD and MA are not widely known and sometimes can just be read literally. So, for example, someone might think that a Doctor of Philosophy means that you're a philosopher of some kind, or that a Master of Arts means that you have an art degree. So you'll have to make this abundantly clear by describing or spelling your degree or title acronym in various ways to avoid confusion. For example, put doctoral degree or doctorate in anthropology. This is the part of the resume where you'll have to do the most work to really streamline and reframe your past experience so that it foregrounds project ownership, cross-functional experience, and impact. If you recall our earlier slides where we shared tips for translating academic research into legible private sector skills, this is where you really want to apply those lessons. On an academic CV, this section might be labeled professional experience. But for your resume, it's more appropriate to use a title like experience or work history. This provides a general enough title that it can encompass all kinds of work, including academic research, analysis, and publications. In contrast, if you use a title like professional experience, this may imply that the work listed was paid, as in a lectureship or visiting scholar. By using a term like experience, it allows you to include a range of paid, unpaid, non-professional, academic, and volunteer experiences. In your experience or work history section, another really important thing to do is present and describe your most significant grants and fellowships with titles as if they were traditional professional jobs. So while most people have no clue what a Fulbright Fellow is, they most likely understand the title Lead Researcher. So go ahead and translate your fellowship title into something more universally understood. And while you're at it, treat the grant-making institution as the employer. Also, it doesn't matter if these positions were not financially compensated like a normal job. The important part is how you describe your experience and its impact. As difficult as it may seem, you'll want to omit any work experience that doesn't relate to or directly support your expertise as a UX researcher. Although some of your work experience may be really impressive and interesting, if it doesn't speak to the requirements in the job description, it unfortunately has to be left out. To the best of your ability, try to make each job description section roughly the same length, so that no single section is significantly shorter or longer than any of the others. Aim for about 2 to 6 lines or bullet points per section, with each of these lines speaking to one of the aforementioned resume requirements of ownership, collaboration, and impact. As we mentioned before, recruiters are generally very busy and sort through a high volume of applicants. As such, they won't spend more than a few moments reviewing any given resume, so it's best to keep descriptions brief and punchy so that you can cover as much ground as possible in just one page.
In the event you have a longer work experience gap in your resume, be that because you took a leave, needed to care for a family member, or spent that time as a bartender to save up cash, just be prepared to provide some context to job recruiters or hiring managers to connect the dots between relevant job experience during your interview. It is acceptable practice to include in your resume, especially for recent MA or PhD graduates, any job stint where you worked in the private sector as a freelance translator, a private tutor, or gained corporate or business experience of some sort. Unfortunately, you'll want to refrain from listing your work as a bartender, server, barista, or doing data entry part-time and the like. For as much as it may hurt, unless you held actual professor, lecturer, adjunct professor, or faculty membership, you want to omit TA-ships and other student teaching positions from your resume. Listing a publication can be beneficial for evidencing impact in the form of thought leadership. You can include publications as part of your experience section or as a separate section entitled Publications. Regardless of where you place your publications, you'll want to be clear about how it connects to your work experience and what you list in your experience entries to ensure it's contributing to the story arc of your ownership, collaboration, and impact. Minor publications or publications that don't directly relate or support the body of work that you're communicating in your resume should simply be left off. Also, it's worth noting that if you do list minor or peripheral publications, you'll need to be prepared to discuss their relevance to UX research during any interview you might have. Generally speaking, for people outside of academia, academic conferences don't really mean much. So an effective way to save valuable page space on your one-page resume and really focus on relatable and relevant content, it's a good idea to omit conference papers and presentations and the like altogether. The last section of your resume is a great place to show off other valuable skills that you might possess and haven't been able to incorporate elsewhere. We're talking about such things as language proficiency, including coding language like R, and software expertise. When we say software expertise, we don't mean Microsoft Word and Excel, but rather professional-related software skills such as NVivo, data visualization software, or other related certifications that you might have completed.
Another hurdle that you may confront when applying for jobs is resume scanning software that filters for applicants whose resumes meet certain requirements outlined in the job description. So one thing that you can do to improve the chances that you make it past scanning software is to really try to mirror the language that's found in the job description in your resume, and if required, in your cover letter as well. And at the same time, although it's important to incorporate job description language throughout your application, there's really no need to go overboard or fundamentally alter the tone and content of how you represent yourself. So here's an example of a typical UX research job description. What you want to do is pull some keywords from the qualification section and pull some key phrases and descriptions from the responsibility section and weave them throughout your resume as naturally as possible. Doing so will definitely improve your odds of making it past scanning software in the case that the company you're applying to utilizes this kind of technology to screen applicants.
A strong resume is a critical component of your job application, and in this module, we've given you some great tools to set yourself up for success. The main thing to remember is that your resume content has to speak directly to the requirements listed in the job description, so make sure you do your homework and read through that job description thoroughly. Hiring managers and recruiters face a lot of time constraints, so it's important to pare down your long CV and refocus it into a one-page resume. This will help ensure that its entirety gets read and reviewed. In terms of the overarching content of your resume itself, you want to really focus on showing your end-to-end project ownership, your experience collaborating with cross-functional partners, and managing stakeholders to accomplish common goals and have measurable impact. Other components of paring down your resume that we've talked about in this module include spelling out a specific degree. So you can't just say a PhD. You want to write out a Doctor of Philosophy in Anthropology or the like. Provide a LinkedIn website link. Provide really punchy summary statement. Display only your highest degree earned, since space is so limited. Turning fellowships into lead researcher roles. Omitting irrelevant experience, such as student teaching roles or minor fellowships, and omitting publications and conference presentations that don't directly support UX research. Make sure to keep description lengths about the same across your experience entries, and by the end of your resume, you can present the other relevant skills you might possess, such as language skills, coding skills, or software skills. And be sure across the board to emulate as close as possible job description keywords and phrasing. By following these guidelines, you'll greatly increase your chances to have your application flagged positively for a callback by recruiters and hiring managers, leading to an interview.